The footsteps above, the night shift begins. Across the United States, thousands of security guards clock in after sunset, taking positions in places that seem to lose their color once the day ends. Office towers, warehouses, schools, and malls all rely on the steady rhythm of a lone patrol. It is work defined by silence and repetition. Yet, for many guards, the silence becomes the thing that unnerves them most. This story begins in downtown Austin, Texas, inside the hollow glass shell of the Minton Corporate Center. The building stands 40 stories high, but after 10 o'clock p.m., it becomes a vertical ghost town. Elevators stop running to most floors. The air system shuts down. The hum of fluorescent lights turns into a faint electric buzz. James Holloway had worked night security there for 6 years. A former Marine, he liked the solitude. "You get used to the quiet," he once told a colleague. "It's predictable. You know every creak, every echo." But the night of April 17, 2016, the quiet betrayed him. By 1:30 a.m., James was doing his scheduled upper-floor patrol. His tablet logged each checkpoint through a barcode scan. Everything had been normal until he reached the 32nd floor, an executive level sealed off for renovations. The elevator doors opened with a chime that seemed too loud in the dark. As he stepped out, he noticed that one of the hallway lights flickered briefly, though power tests earlier that week had shown no faults. James scanned the first checkpoint, moved down the corridor, and then froze. He heard footsteps. The sound came from directly above him, measured, deliberate, like the pacing of a person walking back and forth. James looked up instinctively. Even though he knew the 33rd floor was under maintenance and completely unoccupied, he pressed the radio on his shoulder. "Control, Holloway on 32. Do we have any contractors working tonight on 33? Static." Then the voice of his partner. "Negative. No work orders. You're alone up there." The footsteps continued. Slow, rhythmic, echoing through the concrete. James turned toward the stairwell. His first instinct was procedural. Check it out, confirm no intrusion, document in his report. He climbed the stairwell cautiously, his flashlight cutting through dust particles that hung in the air like ash. When he reached the landing and pushed open the heavy door to the 33rd floor, the sound stopped. He swept the beam left to right, cubicles stripped bare, cables hanging from ceiling grids, a toolbox resting in a corner. He called out, "Security? Anyone up here?" No response. He walked the perimeter, his boots echoing on unfinished flooring. Everything was still. But as he turned toward the stairwell again, a cold draft moved through the hallway. His flashlight flickered, and for a second, he thought he saw a shadow bend across the glass wall opposite him. Something that shifted without a source. Back downstairs, James reviewed the security feed. The camera on 33 showed nothing. No movement, no interference. Just an empty hallway. At 3:10 a.m., he logged a note. Unverified noise, 33rd floor, no visual confirmation. In morning briefings, such notes rarely drew attention. But that week, 2 other guards mentioned hearing similar sounds, footsteps on an upper floor when no one was assigned above them. The building engineer dismissed it as sound bounce from elevator shafts. Yet the pattern persisted. James stayed another 3 months before transferring to a new post. He never reported another incident, but years later he still remembered the weight of that silence after the footsteps stopped. "It wasn't fear," he once said. "It was confusion, like the building was aware you were listening." Cases like the Minton Center are not uncommon. Security logs across the country include countless unexplained noises, movement sensors triggered in empty rooms, and alarms that seem to reset on their own. According to facility studies by the U.S. Building Safety Institute, over 60% of these anomalies can be traced to environmental causes, temperature shifts, water pressure changes, air circulation. Yet for those stationed alone at night, the human brain often interprets such signals as presence. Psychologists call it the isolation effect, when prolonged silence and monotony heighten a person's sensitivity to minor sensory input. A dripping pipe becomes a footstep. A door expanding with temperature becomes a knock. But not every story ends with rational comfort. Sometimes, patterns emerge that resist simple explanations. On the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, the Halden Logistics Depot covers nearly 10 acres of loading bays and storage aisles. At night, the building empties to a skeleton crew, one supervisor, one security officer, and hundreds of silent pallets stacked in perfect symmetry. In November 2019, a guard named Rebecca Lane began her rounds there at 11 o'clock p.m. Her shift routine was repetitive. Check bay doors, verify seals on shipping containers, inspect the east hallway. She often listened to old radio broadcasts through one earpiece to break the monotony. At 2:17 a.m., she paused by bay 14 after hearing what she described as a faint crying sound. Thinking it might be a trapped cat or raccoon, she followed the noise toward a locked storage corridor. The crying grew clearer, a woman's sobs, low and broken. Rebecca radioed her supervisor, who advised her to wait for backup. But as she stood listening, the sound changed, shifting from sorrow to something like gasping, as though the person were choking on air. She pushed open the corridor door. The lights flickered once, and the sound cut off completely. Inside, the corridor stretched 50 feet, lined with crates of outdated computer equipment. No footprints, no movement. She scanned every corner, flashlight steady, heart pounding. When her supervisor arrived minutes later, he found her standing in silence, staring at the far wall. The incident was documented, and the following day, maintenance crews inspected the area. They found no speakers, no ventilation leaks, nothing that could produce a human-like sound. But one worker, an older man who had been with Halden since its opening, mentioned something else. "Years ago," he said, "we lost a temp worker back there. Collapsed during a night shift. Heart failure. Bay 14 was her post." The report didn't mention that detail, but Rebecca later confirmed it privately. She continued working at Halden for 2 more years, never hearing the sound again. Still, she avoided that corridor during her patrols, saying it felt heavy, like the air was holding its breath. In reviewing such cases, security training consultants emphasize the importance of environmental logging, temperature, humidity, and sound level monitoring to identify potential explanations for anomalous events. However, several patterns remain statistically unusual. Repeated auditory phenomena localized to specific areas with no mechanical cause. Temporary electronic interference during reported experiences. Witnesses describing synchronized sensations, pressure changes, static shocks, or cold drafts at moments of perceived activity. While none of these confirm anything supernatural, they indicate that certain spaces amplify perceptual stress under low light, high isolation conditions. Dr. Karen Steele, a cognitive psychologist who studies occupational fear responses, notes, "When you're alone in a large, silent space, your body seeks patterns. The brain will create agency where none exists. But in some cases, the data, like synchronized sensor logs, suggest the environment itself is reacting. In other words, even if what guards hear isn't human, something in those spaces still responds to human presence." By dawn, buildings like Minton Corporate Center and Halden Depot return to life. Elevators hum again, radios chatter. The daylight reclaims the edges of things that seemed infinite at night. But for the guards who patrol through the hours between midnight and 4, those moments linger. Across the country, similar entries appear in security reports. Unverified footsteps, untraceable voices, unexplained movement on closed floors. Each one is a snapshot of uncertainty, a record of a person who heard something that didn't belong. For most, these incidents fade into memory. For others, they become the stories told quietly in break rooms and night shift lounges, stories that carry the same closing line: "You wouldn't believe me unless you were there." And maybe that's the truth behind these night shift encounters. They are not about proof, but about the weight of being alone in spaces built for crowds, about the tension between duty and doubt. The cameras may show nothing, the logs may remain blank. Yet every guard who's worked the long, empty hours knows the feeling. That faint echo of footsteps, one floor above, reminding them that the night has its own kind of awareness.